The brand new Pokemon TCG set Surging Sparks brings exciting new EX Pokemon like Pikachu EX, Ceruledge EX, and Archaludon EX. Today we'll look at decks from Japanese City League tournaments that are using these brand new cards. We're going to start with Archaludon EX decks, so let's look at what this new card does. Archaludon EX is a Stage 1 EX Pokemon that evolves from Duraludon, and it has a whopping 300 HP. The ability Assemble Alloy reads when you play this Pokemon from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon during your turn. You may attach up to 2 basic Metal Energy cards from your discard pile to your Metal Pokemon in any way you like. So we might see this being used to accelerate basic Metal Energy cards to other Pokemon or to Archaludon EX itself, because it has the Metal Defender attack. For 3 Metal Energy, it does 220, which is pretty good considering this is a Stage 1 Pokemon. It has 300 health, and it can accelerate energy to set itself up on turn 2. And then it also reads that during your opponent's next turn, this Pokemon has no weakness. So that's going to be really nice against like a Ceruledge EX deck, since they're fire type, or even against Radiant Charizards, for example. They will no longer hit for 2 times weakness on Archaludon and not get that one-shot knockout so easily because of the Metal Defender attack removing weakness next turn. So that's a nice little addition to this card. So let's see what kind of decks Japan is playing this in at City League tournaments. So here we have a first place Archaludon EX deck list, and this one is using Luxray, which is a really interesting card that doesn't get a lot of use. Luxray, with the ability Explosiveness, says if this Pokemon is in your hand when you're setting up to play, you may put it into the active position. So that's a really unique effect because Luxray is a Stage 2. This deck is not playing any Shinx or Luxio, just the 3 Luxray, hoping to start with it in your hand. And the reason why that's going to be so good is it has the attack Seeking Fang for 1 colorless energy. It does 50 damage, and then you could search your deck for up to 2 trainer cards and put them into your hand. So that's going to get you really set up for next turn if the opponent doesn't disrupt your hand. Searching out supporters, items, stadiums, whatever you want, and poking for 50 damage. And the Luxray itself has free retreat, which is a really nice bonus. You'll see here that this deck is playing Relicanth with Memory Dive, which lets your evolution Pokemon use the attacks from their previous evolutions, and that's going to be really important here because Duraludon, the basic version of Archaludon, has the attack Raging Hammer, which does 80 damage plus 10 more damage for each damage counter on this Pokemon. So if you use your Archaludon's attack to do 220, and then maybe you get hit back for 200. Now with Raging Hammer, you can copy that attack because of Memory Dive and do 280 damage if you have all of that damage on your Archaludon. So I do really like that combo between the Relicanth and the Archaludon EX. Next here we have a second place Archaludon EX deck using B-Barrel as the support, not using that Luxray anymore. But it's also using the Stage 1 non-EX Archaludon card, which says each of your Pokemon that have a Metal Energy attached to it has no retreat cost. So that's going to be really nice for moving around any of these Pokemon. You know, your Duraludon has 2 retreat, your Archaludon has 2 retreat, the Bibarel has 2 retreat, so that's a nice little addition in here. The last list was playing Scoop Up Cyclone, so you could more easily heal maybe a huge Archaludon EX with a lot of damage on it, take it off the board, re-evolve it onto another one, get those energies excelled again. This deck is using Maximum Belt. So with Maximum Belt, you're going to be able to reach 270 damage with Archaludon EX's attack, but it could also help you do even more damage when you're copying the Raging Hammer from Duraludon thanks to the Relicanth's ability, Memory Dive. Now, I did mention that maybe some decks would use Archaludon EX for its ability to accelerate energy to other Pokemon, and that's exactly what we're doing here with this Dialga VSTAR Metang deck, which is something you may have seen before. This won a regional championships last season. The Metal Maker ability lets you accelerate energies, and then Dialga VSTAR has 2 attacks, either Metal Blast, doing more damage for all the energies on it, or Star Chronos, which allows you to take an additional turn after this attack. Of course, that's your VSTAR power for the game. So Duraludon EX can be an additional way to get some energies on the board with that ability that attaches 2 metals from the discard to any of your Pokemon. And in a pinch, it could also be used as an attacker, potentially being a good alternative attacker against a fire deck, since it does have that effect that removes weakness next turn from itself. And the last Archaludon EX deck we'll look at here is another first place City League list, and this one is using the Dunsparce as the support for the deck. Now, one of the best things about the Dunsparce when it first came out was that it had a free retreat Dunsparce to go along with it, but unfortunately that free retreat Dunsparce had 60 health. So that's not really seeing a lot of play anymore because Dragapult EX's Phantom Dive, and also because of Dragapult EX's Phantom Dive in Regidrago VSTAR deck. So technically there's 2 decks using that same attacker, and the 60 HP is just a huge liability to have on the board. So you'll see here that they're using the 70 HP Dunsparce, which does have Find a Friend, search your deck for a Pokemon, and put it into your hand. So it's not all bad, but not having that free retreat definitely hurts. But this is a first place Archaludon the Dunsparce deck list, and we'll see here again they're using that maximum belt to get in more damage. Next up, we'll take a look at Ceruledge EX. So Ceruledge EX is a stage 1 EX as well, 270 HP fire type Terra Pokemon, so that's going to protect it from damage on the bench. And the attack that we're going to be looking to use with this in all of the decks that Ceruledge EX has so far is just Abyssal Flames. Forget that it even has another attack. So Abyssal Flames for 1 fire energy does 30 damage plus 20 more damage for each energy card in your discard pile. So if you have 10 energies in your discard pile, that's going to do 230 damage, and that's not even that hard to get to. So why don't we take a look at how these lists are being built in Japan right now. Here we have a first place City League list for Ceruledge EX. A 4-3 line of Ceruledge EX is going to be pretty standard across the board in these decks. The support Pokemon and backup attackers, so to speak, are going to be really what varies from deck to deck. So here we have an interesting little colorless package of Fan Rotom, Chatot, and then the Hoot Hoot Noctowl. So Noctowl will work in this deck because Ceruledge EX itself is a Terra Pokemon. So as long as you have Ceruledge EX down and then you evolve Noctowl, you'll get to search for any 2 trainer cards, which is a very, very, very strong effect. The purpose of Fan Rotom can be used for a couple of things. So one, of course, it has the fan call ability. So on your first turn, you can go ahead and just search for Hoot Hoot Noctowl Chatot. Now, whether you're going to use that Chatot or not is a different story, but at the very least, you can thin it out of your deck, maybe use it as Ultra Ball or Earthen Vessel fodder. But the Chatot does have the attack Acapella. Search your deck for up to 3 basic Pokemon and put them onto your bench. So that could be very strong. Just search for 3 Charcadets, for example, or 2 Charcadets and a Radiant Greninja, maybe. And the Fan Rotom also can be used for its attack, which does 70 damage as long as there's a stadium in play. So you have the 4 jet energies. So some games maybe you'll want to poke 70 damage to get damage in or knock out an important Pokemon in the active. Other games maybe you'll want to use that jet energy if it's in your hand to bring Chatot into the active and use Acapella. So a cute little colorless package there going on in this deck list that I wanted to talk about. Now the Brilliant Blender A-Spec item seems like it was almost made for this deck. Because it allows you to search your deck for up to 5 cards and discard them. So that's really going to accelerate getting energies into the discard pile for that Ceruledge EX Abyssal Flames damage output. And you'll see here the deck list is playing 19 energy. It looks like around 18 to 21 energy is where the energy card range is that I've seen for Ceruledge EX deck lists so far, so that you do have enough energy in the deck to actually get up to those higher numbers with Abyssal Flames. And next we have another Ceruledge EX first place deck list, this one using a 1/1 line of Palkia V-Star. So this is going to be good for a couple of reasons. Number one, we already want to dump energies into the discard pile, and Palkia V-Star Star Portal gets water energies out of the discard pile. Number two, it could be used as a backup attacker. And number three, it could use the Star Portal to accelerate energies to Radiant Greninja for its Moonlight Shuriken attack, which we know can be devastating against evolution setup decks that need some time to evolve. You could just pick off their smaller Pokemon with Moonlight Shuriken. So it does open up a little bit more versatility for the deck, whereas a lot of Ceruledge EX decks are just going to be using Abyssal Flames, Abyssal Flames, Abyssal Flames, and nothing else. Here we have some other pretty strong and realistic attacks to use thanks to the Palkia VSTAR. Next on the list is Flygon EX. Now, don't get your hopes up too much. I do think Flygon EX is going to be a very fringe card, probably not competitively viable, very much at least. But we do have one deck list to look at for Flygon EX today, and I wanted to showcase as many of the new cards as I can in today's video. So Flygon EX is a stage 2 fighting type, 310 HP Terra EX Pokemon. The attack that I think we'll get the most use out of here is Reversing Storm, just because it's easier to use than the other. Reversing Storm is going to do 130, and then you may switch this Pokemon with one of your benched Pokemon. So that's probably going to encourage strategies like switching into a wall, such as Cornerstone Mask Ogerpon or Mimikyu, or switching into a disruptive Pokemon, maybe like Klefki or Fluttermane. Then it does have another attack, Sonic Peridot. This attack does 100 damage to each of your opponent's Pokemon EX and Pokemon V. This is a really cool attack. However, I do think that because of how many Terra Pokemon are viable and meta right now in the current competitive atmosphere, Sonic Peridot seems pretty weak because Terra Pokemon intrinsically can't be hit by damage on the bench. So if this attack said put 10 damage counters on each of your opponent's Pokemon EX and Pokemon V, I might actually like it a little more, although then that could be stopped by something like Mist Energy. Mist Energy is not as common as just the built-in Terra tag on all of these powerful Pokemon like Teal Mask Ogerpon, Corner Mask Ogerpon, Charizard EX, Dragapult EX, Ceruledge EX. There's just a lot of Pokemon that are going to protect themselves from that bench damage, so for those reasons, I don't think Sonic Peridot is very viable. But like I said, we do have a deck list to look at for Flygon EX, sporting a 3-1-2 line of Trapinch Vibrava Flygon EX, so you can get up into that as your main attacker. And you'll notice some of these things that I mentioned, the walls, the disruptions to switch into. We've got Cornerstone Mask Ogerpon in here, Mimikyu, Klefki, Radiant Jirachi. And they're trying out some other new cards as well here in what is a top 16 deck list. So I don't think this is exactly completely optimal, and it didn't have that well of a performance, but we do have something like the 1/1 Gastrodon, which says that your opponent's stage 2 benched Pokemon have no abilities. So something like a Dusknoir on the bench, or a Pidgeot EX on the bench, or evolving into a Charizard EX on the bench. Gastrodon's ability would shut all of those off, which is pretty cool. I'd like to see how well a deck like this could do if we optimized it and focused it a little more. I feel like things like the Meddling Memo might be a little out of place. The 0-6 Machinations might be a little out of place. Like, I do see the disruption that they're trying to go for here. And I also do like that they've completely omitted even the potential of using the Sonic Peridot attack. They don't play any energies to satisfy that. And I think that is also a good way to go in with the focus, so to speak. Keep this deck consistent and streamlined to try to make something out of it. But I do think they picked a lot of good Pokemon to switch into with the attack. It's just the power level of Flygon EX probably is not there. Next, we have another super interesting one, and this isn't focused on any single new card, but it's a Greninja EX, Pidgeot EX kind of toolbox anti-meta deck. And it is using a couple of new cards. So the new cards here include Black Kyurem EX with that Ice Age attack that is going to be used as a good counter against any Dragon-type Pokemon. Probably specifically Regidrago VSTAR it's going to be very good against, but can also be used against something like Dragapult EX to hit it for 90 and then paralyze it. That's a very strong effect. And then also the Latias EX, reducing your basic Pokemon's retreat cost. The attack won't be used. We don't even have enough energy in the deck to use that attack, but just there for the retreat cost reduction. But looking at this deck as a whole, it's built as sort of a mid-rangey, not really a control style deck, but an anti-meta toolbox deck, trying to have an answer to most things while also having a core strategy of using the Greninja EX as an attacker, using that Shinobi Blade 170 and searching things out of the deck that we need. Something really cool about this deck is the use of Sparkling Crystal as the ace spec. When Sparkling Crystal is attached to a Terra Pokemon, you can reduce the energy cost by 1 type of energy of any type. So, for example, Greninja EX's Mirage Barrage, you can have a Sparkling Crystal and a double Turbo Energy and use that attack. Similar for the Wellspring Ogerpon or the Cornerstone Ogerpon, they're both Terra Pokemon, so you can put Sparkling Crystal and then use their secondary attacks with just a double Turbo Energy. So this is a really cool toolbox deck. It got first place at a City League. I really like seeing these kind of counter toolbox decks that can't really be pigeonholed into an archetype pop up, and especially when they do well, that's great. So there might be something there. If this is a deck that you're specifically interested in, let me know in the comments down below, and if there's anything you would change about this particular list. Next, we're going to look at Hydreigon EX, which is a really cool Pokemon card for a lot of reasons. I mean, it looks amazing and it has some cool effects. So Hydreigon EX has a massive 330 health. It is a stage 2 Pokemon. It's dark type with Terra type, and it has 2 attacks. So Crashing Headbutt for a dark and a colorless does 200, and you discard the top 3 cards of your opponent's deck. Now, I will say you're probably not winning the game by attacking and doing damage and milling your opponent by milling. I don't think you're going to win the game most of the time by putting your opponent to 0 cards with this. However, 200 damage for 2 energy is a good efficient amount of damage, especially on a 330 HP body with a weakness that isn't always going to be relevant. I mean, there is Teal Mask Ogerpon, that's basically the big one for grass. So if you're playing against Raging Bolt, maybe you're a little scared of that. If you're playing against Regidrago VSTAR, maybe you're a little scared of that Teal Mask Ogerpon. But otherwise, a pretty tanky Pokemon doing 200 damage. And that mill, the 3 cards you mill, like I was saying, I don't think it's going to be for a purpose of I want to win by deck out. Rather, discarding 3 cards off the top of your opponent's deck could be detrimental to their strategies. You can hit important cards like an ace spec or a supporter or a rare candy or a one-of Pokemon that they needed. So it is still a pretty good attack, even though the mill probably isn't winning you the game by milling. But it could win you the game just by getting rid of 1 or 2 random cards that your opponent needed. It also has the second attack, which is just named Obsidian, which is a little weird, just 1 word Obsidian. For Psychic, Dark, Metal, Colorless, it does 130, and then it also does 130 damage to 2 of your opponent's bench Pokemon. So this is a high energy cost with a weird combination of energies to actually use it, but it does 133 times. That's 390 damage, which is a lot of damage. So let's look at some deck lists for this card. The first one we have here is a 4th place Hydreigon EX Lost Zone deck. Now, we've seen this before. We've seen Charizard EX Lost Zone. We've seen Dragapult EX Lost Zone. These stage 2 plus a Lost Zone decks rarely ever work out. Dragapult EX Lost Zone saw a lot of play at NAIC last year, or this past season, but I think it saw way too much play compared to how good the deck actually was. But we do have another shot here. Maybe this is finally the stage 2 that pairs well with Lost Zone and actually goes far. Because of Mirage Gate, Legacy Energy, and Counter Gain, Hydreigon EX's second attack is actually quite usable in this deck. So if your opponent doesn't have Manaphy, if your opponent has Pokemon that you want to hit that aren't Terra type or otherwise protected by bench damage or from bench damage, then that Obsidian attack doing 130, 130, 130 could be devastating. So this is a cool deck. It did get 4th place. I definitely question its consistency and viability in a competitive atmosphere past a City League, but nonetheless, it's a cool showcase of Hydreigon EX and what it's capable of. Then we also have a Hydreigon EX Pidgeot EX build. This is going to look a lot more like the typical stage 2 plus Pidgeot decks that we're used to, like Greninja EX, Charizard EX, Dragapult EX. We've seen this before. It's just with a new twist because you're using Hydreigon EX now. So this version is using Neo Upper Energy for Hydreigon EX, since your Pidgeot EX can just search that out pretty easily. So you just quick search for the Neo Upper energy, and then you're already doing your first attack just for that Neo Upper. But if you have Neo Upper plus one other energy plus counter gain, then you can use the Obsidian attack as well. So going for those big swings with that damage spread all over the place, the 133 times, but also using the efficiency of the 200 damage for just 2 energy. Also, squeaking in here, the Monkey Dory with the Adrenabrain, which can do some supplemental damage. So maybe you swing 200 on a Pokemon that has 220 health or 230 health. And then they hit you back, then you could attach a Dark Energy to Monkey Dory and Adrenabrain and clean up that Pokemon. Next, let's take a look at one of the most anticipated cards out of this set, which is Magneton. Magneton's a stage 1 Pokemon with the ability Overvolt Discharge. Once during your turn, you may attach up to 3 basic energy cards from your discard pile to your lightning Pokemon in any way you like, and then this Pokemon is knocked out. We know that self-KO abilities can be incredibly strong because we can control things like Counter Catcher and Roxanne, and now Counter Gain with these effects. But this is going to be kind of as good as the lightning Pokemon that we can accelerate these energies to. So here we have a first place Miraidon deck that's utilizing a 2/2 line of Magneton. Of course, Miraidon EX decks have electric generators to accelerate energy, but Magneton is a guaranteed energy acceleration effect. As for attackers in this deck list, it's pretty streamlined with 2 Miraidon, 2 Iron Hands, and 1 Raichu V. However, that Raichu V can be incredibly strong thanks to Magneton. Maybe you play an electric generator, hit 2 energies off of that, then you Magneton 3 more energies onto the board, then you attach for turn, and just like that, Raichu V is swinging for 360 damage maximum. And this deck list does have the new Latias EX in there, as well as the Lively Stadium, which says that each basic Pokemon in play gets plus 30 health. Next is Milotic EX, stage 1 Pokemon, 270 health, water type. One of the bad things about this is that it has to evolve from Phoebus, which always has really low HP. But Milotic EX, it has the ability Sparkling Scales, prevent all damage from and effects of attacks from your opponent's Terra Pokemon done to this Pokemon. So this is a brand new walling ability. It's not blocking EXs, it's not blocking V in specific, it's blocking Terra Pokemon. So there are a lot of strong Terra Pokemon out there. We've got Charizard EX, Dragapult EX, the new Pikachu EX that we haven't even talked about yet. So it could potentially be a strong wall. And then it does have the attack Hypno Splash 160. Your opponent's active Pokemon is now asleep. Nothing really important there. We're looking at this card for its ability mostly. So we do have a few deck lists to look at for Milotic EX. First, we have a 4th place deck list here, utilizing that new Gastrodon as well, which says that your opponent's stage 2 Pokemon on the bench have no abilities. So that can just shut down some decks right there. And then you also have the Farigiraf EX, which can't be hit by your opponent's basic Pokemon EX. Mimikyu, which can't be hit by EX or V, and Cornerstone Ogerpon, which can't be hit by Pokemon that have an ability. So we have all of the walls in the game pretty much here. Just pick and choose depending on what kind of deck your opponent's playing. But of course, we also have a lot of energy in this deck. So this is not only a wall deck, but it is an attacking wall deck. So you're going to try to take prize cards while pushing up Pokemon that are very annoying or downright impossible for your opponent to get through. Next, we'll see some similar strategies in this first place deck list. However, they're using Noivern EX with that covert flight attack that does 70 damage and then next turn prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by your opponent's basic Pokemon. So, whereas the Farigiraf was just walling out basic EXs, this is walling out all basic Pokemon. So if you come up against something like Lost Box or against Ancient Box with these basic single prize Pokemon, Noivern EX might just completely wall them out and win the game on its own. This list is also using the 1/1 Palkia VSTAR as well as Radiant Greninja, so you could maybe get some Moonlight Shuriken shenanigans into there, or maybe just use Palkia VSTAR as an attacker let's say your opponent has one good Pokemon to get through your walls, Palkia V-Star does a lot of damage, so it can probably remove it in an attack or two, and then you can get back to your walling strategy if needed. Finally, one more variant of Milotic EX. This is a third place deck list with 4 Iron Thorns EX in it, but then it's also playing these wall Pokemon. So if the 4 Iron Thorns EX, if you come up against a deck where Iron Thorns does just not cut it for you, it just doesn't do enough against the opponent, you have Milotic EX if they're using Terra Pokemon, you have Noivern EX if they're using all basic Pokemon, Cornerstone Ogerpon if they're using Pokemon with abilities, and of course Mimikyu to cover the general field of EX and Pokemon V. So Milotic EX, you'll see here in these 3 deck lists we looked at, it's going to be used in sort of stall wall strategies, but also attacking wall strategies. So not just trying to wall out your opponent, but also trying to take prize cards while doing so. Finally, we're getting to the poster card of the set, Pikachu EX. Pikachu EX is a basic Terra EX Pokemon with 200 health, and it is Lightning type. It has the ability Resolute Heart. If this Pokemon has full HP and would be knocked out by damage from an attack, it is not knocked out, and its remaining HP becomes 10. This is incredible. You know, your opponent can hit you with 300 damage and you'll still survive as long as you were at full HP prior to getting hit. So there are ways around that. Your opponent can poke with a Dusclops or with an Adrenabrain from Monkey Dory, or maybe they could set poison on you, hit you, you go down to 10, then poison knocks you out. So there's absolutely ways around this. Also, canceling Cologne's another way around this. So there's plenty of ways around this ability, but just putting it out there, making your opponent have a check for it is great. Because if they can't get around it, then you basically get a free extra turn out of your Pikachu EX. And its one attack is Topaz Bolt, 300 damage, and you have to discard 3 energy from this Pokemon, and it costs Grass, Lightning, and Metal to use. So let's look at how decks are building with this Pikachu EX to make use of that Topaz Bolt with that really weird energy cost. So here we have a first place Blissey EX Pikachu EX deck list. Now Blissey EX is amazing for this because you can use Glass Trumpet to accelerate energies onto your Chanseys or Blisseys, and then use Blissey EX's Happy Switches to move those energies onto your Pikachu. So, you know, you attach a 1 energy to Pikachu, you use Glass Trumpet, you use 2 Happy Switches, attack for 300. And then do it again and do it one more time, and at that point you've probably knocked out 3 2-prize Pokemon and win the game. There's some other tools in here. So we've got Monkey Dory to poke extra damage if you need to, because remember, 300 damage might sound like a lot, but it's not knocking out everything. So Monkey Dory can help you get there, reach over the 300 threshold against things like Dragapult and Charizard. We have the Power Glass in here, which is a pretty cool tool for Pikachu. At the end of your turn, you may attach a basic energy from your discard pile to this Pokemon, so that's 1 less energy you need to get onto the Pikachu next turn. And interestingly, the A-spec of choice here is this new Precious Trolley card. Search your deck for up to any number of basic Pokemon and put them onto your bench. So it's really good for setting up. You get this on turn 1. You could put 3 Chanseys, a Monkey Dory, a Radiant Greninja on the bench, maybe if you already have a Pikachu in the active, or maybe 3 Chansey, Radiant Greninja, Pikachu, get the Monkey Dory later if you need it. And then also using that new Stadium card, which is going to reduce the health of Stage 2 Pokemon by 30 health. So if you can't get around their higher health with Monkey Dory, you also have this Stadium card as an option for bringing Charizard or Dragapult down to 300 or less health. Next, we have kind of a weird one, which is this Arceus Regieleki VMAX Pikachu deck. I've seen this before from Japan. This list, by the way, got 3rd place at a City League. So Regieleki VMAX can be an okay attacker for a couple of reasons. Also Regieleki V, of course. So Regieleki V has that attack that does 100 and then reduces damage done to itself by 100 next turn. Regieleki VMAX does 220, but it also has free retreat, which is pretty nice as well. So with 310 HP, swinging 220 is good because there's a lot of things with 220 out there that are basic Pokemon. And then you also have the Lipard for draw support, the Magneton for energy acceleration, and the Pikachu EX, of course, to swing for 300. But the Regidrago VMAX's Transistor ability actually lets you swing for 330, so you no longer have to worry about reaching that 330 mark with the Pikachu EX. I don't think this deck is actually that good, but it did get third place at a City League. It looked pretty interesting, so I wanted to showcase it. Next, unfortunately, another one that I don't think is very good, but it has some interesting stuff going on, so I wanted to show it to y'all. Pikachu EX with Joltik and Galvantula and Magneton and Miraidon. There's a lot going on here. But the most important part of this is that Joltik has the attack that lets you search your deck for up to 2 grass and 2 lightning energies, and then attach them to your Pokemon in any way you like. If you went second, that's going to be a great option. If you go first, you'll probably look to use Magneton on turn 2 instead. But then you also have the Galvantula EX here. It has 2 different attacks. You're not going to be able to use the second attack just because we don't have the energy cards required for that in this deck. But it can be a neat backup attacker, swinging for some good damage with the Charge Web attack. Yeah, I do think this list is a little bit all over the place. Doesn't look exactly consistent, so to speak, and it only got 11th place. Haven't seen much more from it since, so I don't think this is a very good deck as is, but maybe somebody can do something with it. Wanted to show it to you anyway. And then the most successful version of Pikachu EX decks so far has been Lost Zone versions. So this is a first place Lost Zone Pikachu, and it's not the only first place Lost Zone Pikachu deck out there from the Japanese City Leagues. This has been a pretty successful archetype, it seems. So you have the Lost Zone core, the Comfey, Cramorant, Sableye, Radiant Greninja, Colress, Mirage Gates, all of those cards you expect to see in a Lost Zone deck. But then you also have Pikachu EX as a potential one-shot knockout Pokemon. So it's playing all of the energy cards that Pikachu EX will need, and then it also plays the Gravity Mountain to bring Stage 2 Pokemon's HP down. So it seems like a pretty efficient deck. Poking with single prize attackers when it needs to, using Iron Hands to take a double prize knockout on a single prizer when need to, and then Pikachu EX is just the bomb you could drop at any point and do 300 damage out of nowhere. And lastly, for Pikachu EX, you can just toss it into a Miraidon deck as your Terra Pokemon of choice, so that you can use Area 0 Underdepths. You can fill your bench with this. You could just search it out with Tandem Unit. We also have that new Rotom in there. Not exactly sure how much play that will see, but it's interesting enough to note that it's there. But yeah, this deck is just using Pikachu EX as a Terra Pokemon that is also probably not going to get bossed and hit because of its ability that protects it from one-shot knockouts. So we saw people using the Mewtwo EX Terra type in Miraidon decks for that Area 0 Underdepths effect, but this is likely just a little bit better because it has that ability protecting it. Next, we'll take a look at a Regidrago VSTAR deck list that has nothing too crazy in it except for this goofy looking new Alolan Exeggutor EX. So the reason why you would want an Alolan Exeggutor EX in Regidrago VSTAR is to copy its Swinging Sphene attack. Grass, Water, Fighting. Flip a coin if heads, knock out your opponent's active basic. If tails, knock out one of your opponent's benched basic Pokemon. So the situations in which this is good is when your opponent has both a basic in the active and a basic on the bench that would both satisfy the requirements you're looking for. So for example, if you have 2 prize cards remaining and your opponent has a basic in the active and a basic on the bench and they're both worth 2 prizes, then you can use this attack to essentially guarantee winning the game, because if heads you knock out the active, if tails you knock out the bench. So it's a nice like closer attack to finish out a game in those specific situations. Other than that, this deck list pretty much remains unchanged from normal Regidrago deck lists we see. They do have a Thornton in here, but Thornton in Japanese deck lists is actually pretty common in Regidrago. Back in Worlds, when I played Regidrago VSTAR, I hit 2 mirror matches. I believe one player from China, one player from Japan, and they were both playing Thornton. So I've noticed that Japanese players tend to, or I should say players from Asia maybe, tend to play Thornton in their Regidrago VSTAR deck lists more often than the rest of the world, maybe. Just something I've noticed. Next up, we've got Slaking EX, which is a pretty interesting one. Stage 2 Pokemon with 340 health. They're really pushing the envelope on the health of these EX Pokemon. It's pretty insane, but it still feels balanced. So the ability Born to Slack. If your opponent has no Pokemon EX or Pokemon V in play, this Pokemon can't attack. So it's essentially a useless 340 health. How useless can it be at 340 health? But pretty useless 340 health Pokemon with 0 attacks on it that can't use attacks if your opponent doesn't have an EX or V in play. Now, most opponents will have an EX or a V in play. And so if they do, you can use this Pokemon's attack called Great Swing. It does 280 damage for 2 energy, and you have to discard energy from this Pokemon. So either 280 or 260 with a double turbo on it. So it swings a large amount of damage, and it has very high health. The list we'll take a look at for Slaking is 9th place. It's a Slaking EX Pidgeot EX deck list. Using a lot of the tools we see in Stage 2 decks. In addition to the Pidgeot, you've got the Rotom V, the Heavy Arven engine, the Forest Hill Stone to use on Rotom V, etc. Something nice about the Slaking line is that you can use Fan Rotom to search out your Slackoths, as well as your Pidgey, and you can even search out a Vigoroth if you want with the Fan Rotom as well. This deck is using Boomerang energy because Slaking X has to discard an energy when it attacks. Boomerang energy essentially negates that discarding effect, or that discarding cost from the attack. Next, we've got another old deck with a couple of new cards. This is going to be Snorlax Stall. So Snorlax blocking your opponent from retreating, Mimikyu and Cornerstone walling your opponent's various Pokemon. The new cards involved here, one of them is Durant EX. So Durant EX has this ability that when you play it down from your hand to your bench, you can discard the top card of your opponent's deck. If your opponent gets down to just a 1-card deck, this can be good. You can use Durant and then penny it up and then use it again. So that's also an option. Typically, you're not like racing to mill your opponent out. Like once you've hit your win condition of getting rid of their switching outs or getting rid of their Pokemon that can hit through your walls, you're good to just sit there and pass until they run out of cards. But in Japan, a tie is a loss for both players, so getting them to that mill win condition faster might be more important in this environment. And also, you could just use Durant to hope to hit important cards off the top. So not necessarily going for that lethal mill, but using Durant's ability, penny it back up, use Durant's ability, maybe you hit a switch or an important card that's going to help your opponent get around your strategy. In addition to that, we've got a new ace spec in here, the Megaton Blower, which is an item ace spec that says discard all special energies and Pokemon tools from all of your opponent's Pokemon, and then discard a stadium in play. So this is like the trump card versus Lugia. Could be incredibly strong against Lugia decks. Maybe not much else, but yeah, very, very good against Lugia decks, just to get rid of all of their special energies, stronger than something like Giacomo. And the final new card we're going to highlight in this video is Sylveon EX, which is a 270 HP Psychic Terra-type EX Pokemon. It has 2 attacks, the first being Magical Charm. It does 160, and then next turn attacks used by the defending Pokemon do 100 less damage. Now let me explain why this is not as good as an attack that says reduce damage done to this Pokemon by 100. Because if the opponent's Pokemon switches or evolves, it is no longer the defending Pokemon, and it will no longer have that effect on them. However, a reason why this could be better is because if they boss around Sylveon EX, they gust up something else, and they keep that defending Pokemon in the same place, it's still the defending Pokemon, and it'll do 100 less damage to that new Pokemon that they brought up. So, interesting attack. It's not amazing, but it has some uses. And then the second attack with those weird energy costs being a Terra Stellar Pokemon is Angelite. Choose 2 of your opponent's benched Pokemon, shuffle those Pokemon and all attached cards into your opponent's deck. If one of your Pokemon used Angelite during your last turn, this attack can't be used. So we just talked about Megaton Blower in that Snorlax Stall deck and how that could be devastating for Lugia. Angelite can just choose 2 of your opponent's Archeopses and shuffle them into your opponent's deck, and now they have no more Archeopses. So let's look at what deck lists are looking like in Japan for Sylveon EX. First up here, we have a control style of Sylveon EX, actually looking a lot like the Snorlax Stall list we just looked at, using Snorlax, using Mimikyu, using Cornerstone, and using some of those same supporters like Penny, Misfortune Sisters, Eri. Also, notably using Crispin as a way to accelerate multiple energies to your Sylveon EX. Now, the reason I'd be skeptical of this deck list and this strategy is just because Sylveon EX needs to get 3 energies onto it in order to use either of its attacks, one of those attacks being very specific energies, and the only way to accelerate energies in this deck is Crispin. So it's definitely reasonable to say that that Angelite attack, shuffling 2 of your opponent's Pokemon into their deck, can be devastating against a lot of decks. However, getting to that point, getting the energies on it, I'm skeptic of the consistency of this strategy working out. However, this is a pretty cool deck list that was able to get 4th place at a City League. And then we have a 3rd place Sylveon Lost Zone deck, so trying to power up those attacks, probably specifically the Angelite attack, with the help of Mirage Gate here in the Lost Zone engine. But overall, I don't think Sylveon EX is going to be like a top tier meta contender or anything. But like I said, it's devastating against a deck like Lugia that has multiple Pokemon that it has to set up and then can never set up again. Or maybe against something like a Pidgeot control deck where they have limited rare candies. You could shuffle their Pidgeots away. The Angelite attack is really, really cool and can be really, really strong in specific scenarios. But putting these cards in, putting the deck space into that strategy, I just wonder, is it really worth it? Can't we just win other ways by, knocking out opponents' Pokemon? I hope you enjoyed today's video looking at new Surging Sparks deck from Japanese City League tournaments. You can find Japanese City League tournament results. I'll leave a link in the description or in a comment, and check out ways you could support my channel and content in the description down below as well. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time here on Celio's Network.